Joe Pusateri from St. Walter in Roselle, and this is our final session in our series of 6 on Pope Francis' latest encyclical letter, Fratelli Tutti. In this session, we're discussing chapters 7 and 8 of the encyclical, entitled Paths of Renewed Encounter and Religions at the Service of Fraternity in Our World. In chapter 7, Pope Francis calls for peacemakers to forge new paths of healing and renewed encounter in our fractured world. He begins by explaining that building peace requires starting anew from the truth and facing the reality of the harm done. It's a patient effort to seek truth and justice, to honor the memory of victims, and to open the way, little by little, to a shared hope stronger than the desire for vengeance. He reminds us that every act of violence committed against a human being is a wound in humanity's flesh. Every violent death diminishes us as a people because violence leads to more violence, hatred to more hatred, and death to more death. We have to break this cycle, even though it seems inescapable. The Holy Father writes that in the difficult work of building a peaceful society, there's an architecture of peace to which different institutions of society contribute, but there's also an art of peace that involves us all. Drawing a parallel between society and a family, he then reminds us that family disputes are always resolved afterwards. The joys and sorrows of each of its members are felt by all. That's what it means to be a family. If only we could view our political opponents or neighbors in the same way that we view our children, our spouse, our mother, or our father. How good would this be? Pope Francis describes the importance of reconciliation and its relationship to forgiveness, explaining that while forgiveness is central to Christianity, it doesn't mean forgetting harm done, and it can't be required of victims. Memory is important. We can't forget tragedies such as the Holocaust or the atomic bombings in Japan, lest we repeat these catastrophic mistakes. And building social friendship doesn't call for reconciliation only between groups who took different sides at some troubled point in history, but also for a renewed encounter with the most impoverished and vulnerable sectors of society. And those who work for peaceful coexistence should never forget that inequality and the lack of integral human development make peace impossible. Indeed, without equal opportunities, different forms of aggression and conflict will find a fertile terrain and eventually explode. Finally, Pope Francis develops the Church's teaching on the irrationality of the false answers of the death penalty and war, including the use or threat of nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons. Francis stands strongly against war because war is the negation of all rights and a dramatic assault on the environment. If we want true, integral human development for everybody, we have to work tirelessly to avoid war between nations and peoples. He calls out the overuse of the concept of a just war, citing overly broad interpretations of its conditions. We can no longer think of war as a solution because its risks will always be greater than its supposed benefits. If war is the instrument used to impose justice, it's no longer a fit instrument. Speaking of the death penalty, he cites Pope St. John Paul II in saying that it is inadequate from a moral standpoint, and it's no longer necessary. He explains that the arguments against the death penalty are numerous and well known, and the Church has rightly called attention to several of these, such as the possibility of judicial error, and because some totalitarian regimes have used it to suppress political dissidents and persecute religious minorities. All Christians and people of goodwill are today called to work not only for the abolition of the death penalty, legal or illegal, in all its forms, but also to work for the improvement of prison conditions out of respect for the human dignity of persons deprived of their freedom. In chapter 8, Pope Francis shares his belief and hope that the religions of the world can be at the service of fraternity. He writes, "We, the believers of the different religions, know that our witness to God benefits our societies. The effort to seek God with a sincere heart, provided it is never sullied by ideological or self-serving aims, help us recognize one another as traveling companions, truly brothers and sisters. People of faith are called to work together, to build bridges and seek the common good. He reiterates that while the Church proclaims the gospel of Jesus Christ, it esteems the way in which God works in other religions, and rejects nothing of what is true and holy in these religions, affirming especially that which contributes to the common good. The Christian religion strongly champions a moral dimension, rejecting relativism in all its forms. The moral dimension of the Church informs the actions of individuals in the public sphere. He recognizes that among the most important causes of the crises of the modern world are a desensitized human conscience, a distancing from religious values, and the prevailing individualism in our society. These are accompanied by materialistic philosophies where human beings are considered godlike and introduce worldly and material values in place of supreme and transcendental principles. For these reasons, the Church, while respecting the autonomy of political life, doesn't restrict her mission to the private sphere alone. On the contrary, she cannot and must not remain on the sidelines in the building of a better world. Pope Francis believes that a journey of peace is possible between religions, and that violence is a distortion of our fundamental religious convictions. And as religious leaders, we're called to be true people of dialogue, to cooperate in building peace, not as intermediaries, but as authentic mediators. Based on his encounter with the Grand Imam Ahmad al-Tayeb, he makes an appeal for peace, justice, and fraternity among all people of faith. To conclude, he names several others whose work inspired this encyclical, including Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Desmond Tutu, and Blessed Charles de Foucauld. Of Blessed Charles, he says that he considered himself a brother to every human being. He concludes with this hope, that by identifying with the least, Blessed Charles came at last to be the brother of all. May God inspire that dream in each one of us. Thank you for participating in this series on Fratelli Tutti. I hope, with Pope Francis, that each of you will take his dream as your own.